to take some of your questions from the Patreon. Some of these questions are very good and very complex. Me and Jeanette have just filmed some of the latest news breakdowns for you guys. But we're going to take some of these questions and do our best to answer them. There's some very good ones and some very timely ones. And Jeanette's going to do me the favor of reading some of these off, and we're going to discuss some of these.
Sure. So, Patreon user asks, what are your thoughts on the state of things in the border town of San Luis Rio Colorado? Second question related to this, it says, I believe they are staging more soldiers and submarines along with a few helicopters out of Mexicali and San Luis Rio Colorado.
Yeah.
Is this a sign? Sorry.
Yeah.
Is this a sign of things escalating there or something more nefarious?
Basically, the border fence and the border security has been built up historically from the west to the east. And as it's being built up and border security gets tighter and tighter along this corridor, things are moving eastwards, which makes it a prime target of cartels basically gaining or fighting for control of it. Most of what is in the western part of the state, like here in Tijuana, has been historically controlled by the Sinaloa cartel. What you're seeing out in that area is a conflict, an expression of a conflict between parts of the Sinaloa cartel, like that are attached to Los Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo Guzman, El Mayo Zambada, and also elements of the New Generation cartel that are also in the fray to try and take control of some of this territory. The response of the current government is to send the military in. So right now in Tijuana, like Jeanette coming here, saw some of them operating nearby. Federal forces are all over the place in an act of presencia, is what they call it, presence. Basically an uptake in physical patrols, helicopters flying overboard. But all of that is basically just a show of force. What is being fought for is access to the largest drug market on the planet, which is the United States. The funnel is going smaller and smaller towards the east on the West Coast side and towards the west on the West Coast side. So if anybody wants to figure out where the violence is going to be on that border, just figure out where the border wall isn't built up that much. There's a giant desert there. It's hard to patrol, giant terrain. The Border Patrol, and I know this because I've trained some of them and I've actually done multiple contracts on their end. They're not equipped either with personnel or money to patrol that whole border segment. There's armed incursions constantly going on in that border area. And I think what you're seeing is basically a fight for the last remnants of that unsupervised open border. And it also showcases a clear split within the Sinaloa, or what we thought of as a Sinaloa federation of cartels in the past. El Mayo Zambada seems to have more ability to project his forces outward from Sinaloa, while the Chapitos are kind of depending on contacts in local small groups that they support and kind of like use to enforce their interest in the area. What you're seeing is fights for specific routes up into the border to cross. These routes are not just drug related; they're also people trafficking related, which is, depending on what part of the border and what cartel you're talking about, people are their biggest money makers right now. How much have you heard them charging for crossing somebody?
Thousands.
Yeah, I've heard 5,000. I've heard 2,000. I've heard IOUs. You'll see people crossing the border with a specific band on their arm, which means it's an IOU. And an IOU is basically, hey, this person didn't pay for his crossing, but he has family members on the U.S. side that you can basically ransom him off. Or he's going to work it off somewhere. People talk about slavery a lot in the U.S., and they don't realize that slavery is alive and well in a lot of the service industries in the U.S. and a lot of the plantation agriculture side of the country. People are fighting on the southern border for the ability to put people in the U.S. and politics and people in the U.S. are fighting to make that easier which is kind of mind-blowing to kind of see. So what you're seeing on the border right now is just that, an open fight for the ability and access into the United States and controlling that border. People have to realize on the Mexican side, the Mexican government does not control the northern border of Mexico. It has absolutely no control or patrol patterns are on that border. It doesn't know what crosses it. There is absolutely no eyes on the border in Mexico looking at that border to see what goes across it into the north. This is just doesn't exist. The people that are enforcing it and securing it are cartels, and they're enforcing it and securing it for their own interest. And that's who's on this side. On the other side, there's a very under-supported, underfunded, and vilified Border Patrol that nobody wants to support politically. So what do you get? Navidad is what I heard a people smuggler say once. You get Christmas. It's Christmas for them. I think that's what's going on the border.
The following question. My thoughts go out to all the worried parents, kids, students, staffs in light of the recent shootings at UNC. What are some back-to-school safety best practices or recommendations?
It's an interesting question. I didn't go to school in the U.S. Did you go to school in the U.S.? You did go to school in the U.S. But I've been talking to a few campuses and just experiencing this lockdown culture, this fear around it. What I'm doing, I have a 9-year-old, and what I've been doing is normalizing the new realities of the life that she's probably going to have to face and live. Some of you lived through the Cold War era where you were trained to do duck and cover in case of an explosion went on, and I know that was scary as shit. I didn't experience school shootings. I experienced shootings outside in the streets, but not in school. School is actually a safe place for me growing up. But that's changed. Firearms, how they work, what they can go through, calibers, knowing how to shoot them, all these things are scary things for some people that have never been exposed to them, but our kids will be. And if you are not wise or knowledgeable in the use and how these things work, you should probably get educated in that. If not for you, for them. An unknown enemy is always going to be a very dangerous enemy. So I think the best weapon you can have right now is education. It is alarming for some people to see a 9-year-old maybe at a gun range shooting a .22 Mark pistol. My daughter's been to a range. I took her to a range twice. And she's, plinked a little bit with a .22 pistol. She knows enough about a gun to know that wherever the barrel is pointing is a dangerous area. And she is aware enough about that projecting a bullet and that is a scary and dangerous thing. So she probably should not point that anywhere. And if she sees somebody pointing that at her end, she knows enough to run, duck, cover, or look for an actual thing that'll stop a bullet. So education. That education is not going to be found out there. You're going to have to take care of that education. Modern, urban, survival education for your kids. It used to be a thing where we'd take our kids to, Cub Scouts or, the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. I think some of these organizations were preparing our youth for something. And I think there should be a new organization to prepare our youth for other things. And if that organization doesn't exist, we should create it for ourselves. Medical management. Stop the bleed classes are all over the country. I see a lot of adults in them. I don't see a lot of kids. Desperation and fear produces a lot of weird solutions to things. In my whole career, I have never seen anybody utilize a ballistic backpack and or shroud successfully to ward off a shooting incident of the kind that we're talking about. I have seen kids escape some mass shooting situations by being proactive, by breaking out of places, by running, by knowing what cover is, by not following the instructions of some adults that they'll tell them to shelter in place and not look for solutions of their own, to not think for themselves. In the past, when kids would play hide and seek, they were actually training survival. You know, hide and seek was like, hey, the bad guys are coming, let's hide. You know, I think creating a way for kids to learn about some of these things with some fear behind it. The world is sometimes a scary place. I want to be Mr. Rogers for people, you know, and everybody's fine and we're all friends and expect the best, but we also should expect the worst sometimes. And I guess education should be at home when it comes to some of these things. Teach them how to use a tourniquet. Teach them how to plug a wound, how to pack a wound. My mom showed me how to improvise a tourniquet when I was 10. My daughter, she's 9 right now, she can apply one to me. Like she knows how to operate a cat tourniquet. People that see me show that to her are alarmed by it. She's too little. She shouldn't be knowing about some of these things. Let her have her childhood. Her childhood and my childhood are different, and they have to be different. We have to make that distinction. Prepare. Train them at home. Get them ready. There's a difference between being paranoid and educating what it is smart to be paranoid about, so you can teach them how to focalize. We can talk about guns, we can talk about equipment, we can talk about medical training, but also a big thing that is never talked about is threat identification and some of the psychology that leads us into some of these things. There's a few resources that I utilize a lot. One of them is Emergence. It's a company run by a former guest of the podcast, Yusuf Bado. It's a threat and terrorist identification training. One thing you don't realize about that type of training and just awareness training and figuring out who could be a threat and who is indicating some social alarm bells. One thing we don't realize as parents when you go through a course like that is that we then regurgitate that information to our kids in small doses. And that's a beautiful thing. If you're not doing it, try and think about that in a more conscious way. And it breaks my heart every time I hear and see some of these things. You know, Americans look at Mexico as a nightmarish place. Mexicans look at the U.S. and their schools as a nightmarish place. So horror is everywhere in a way. It's perspective. And it is very scary to think about your children in a setting like that. They are not living the childhood that we did, and we need to stop pretending that they are. We need to prepare them for their future and for their journey.
This Patreon user says, or asks, what best things to hide in a travel belt?
You travel a lot. What's been one of the some of the things that you've needed in your travels? I mean, so Jeanette's well traveled, more travel than I am. You know.
Yes, I travel borders quite a lot, so not raising any alarms is also very important for me.
So nothing tactical, nothing ninja-like, discreet stuff.
Yes, and when we're talking, you know, you just mentioned also identifying threats. I think not looking like a threat myself is also very important. So blending in, you know, I do carry a few protective or defensive tools myself, but I try not to brandish those or make those obvious because I, you know, being a woman in some aspects, you don't want to invite people in.
Yeah.
You don't want to brandish yourself as a target. So I try to travel minimally, you know, a few door alarms as well. Door security is very important to me, especially since I travel to a lot of very...
A good night's sleep is such a powerful weapon.
It is.
And peace of mind. Yeah.
And sometimes those are rare to come. So as much as you can provide a little bit comfort in your mind, also to know that if someone tries to open that door, it'll be difficult for them. You've also given a few of those things to me, few door alarms, few basically door jammers. And you know, a lot on the tech side, you know, a dead phone is useless to you. So power banks, making sure that you have several of those.
Independent forms of charging and gaining and accessing power for electronic devices, which a lot of people don't think about it, but this phone is a camera, it's a GPS tracker, it's a source of information, it's a map, it's everything. We're not cyborgs yet, but we're pretty close. So yeah, having access to ways of keeping this active and alive. What type of phone do you travel with?
I traveled two. One of them does not have a SIM card. One of completely, basically the only way that I can access any sort of outside communication is by a trusted Wi-Fi. And the other one does have a SIM card. It's an iPhone. And in some cases, I've picked up a little Nokia that you could just buy with cash. Don't put any SIM cards in there. Only have cell phone numbers that you need at that time. But I think you also need to research the areas that you go into, especially as very diverse travelers, and because we're often investigating things that tend to be very sensitive. One of the best defensive tools that I've gathered is just knowledge about where I'm going and what I should expect. Not being surprised by many things, is a very good tactic to just know how to operate or know how to behave if something does come up. So I do recommend that everyone just do their research.
Look before you leap.
Absolutely.
Open source, just search engine this area, Google Maps it, see what's there, see what cars are around, what type of cars are there, what to prepare for, I guess. Do an online search of where you're going and see the history of travelers getting into shit there. If you want to predict the future, just watch the news. Those that don't learn of history are destined to repeat it. It's a true statement.
Another thing that I also rely on is the best source of information will always be locals. They've adapted to the areas that they live in. They understand normalities and abnormalities of their environment. So whenever I go anywhere, just sit in a restaurant, start a conversation with someone. I love starting conversations with women because that also, they tend to be untapped sources of knowledge and wealth of information. And so just having a very simple conversation with people gathers a lot of very useful information. So I have this experience in my life where I was somewhere where I didn't know the area that well, and I saw a bunch of the locals stuck behind a counter, right? And instead of orientating myself to see what they were ducking against, I decided to duck too, just to make sure what was going on. And lo and behold, something kicked off. You can be the biggest ninja on the planet and have all the awareness training in the world, but if you meet somebody that's part of the baseline of the area, you should probably follow suit, I guess. That's when in Rome. On my end, I think things to hide on my travel belt are, there's a thing called diamond wire. They sell it in a spool. I think a company called Shomer Tech sells it. I usually carry around one of those. I'm not going to pull it out right now because it's going to take me a while because it's really well hidden. But it's basically a way to cut through metal, cut through most things, zip ties and a lot of stuff. It's rounded so you can hide it behind a button or hide it in your change. Out of all the escape tools that I've seen, carried, and used with me, that's been one of the ones that I've used the most. I've cut padlocks off doors. I've cut the handles off doors to gain access to places. I've cut steering columns and taken off club devices that's to make the vehicles inoperable. It's just a handy thing to have. Out of all the people that I've talked to have been shady stuff, including some people that have escaped from prisons in the U.S. and a dude that was part of a big escape out in Colombia. All of them share kind of the same information with me as far as what they had and what they wish they had. Money and or things that are of value are the biggest escape tools on the planet. So figure out what is of value in the place you're going to travel through. And you can have a $100 bill and you can have a flashlight in some places. And the flashlight is going to make more doors open than a $100 bill because that dollar bill, they can't eat it. They can't use it. So a lot of gift-giving items is usually what I carry. Items that can be gifted out, bartered with, traded in, or used for bribery. A few of you notice that I carry some gold with me every now and then. Those have led to accessing doors, rides home,
helping me get a ride to get a change of tire, buying stuff, paying for stuff. And yeah, being friendly and a smile is the best thing you can carry with. It's one of the best things. Yes, the world's unfriendly, but if you're friendly to it, it becomes friendly back. There's certain people in an area. If you want to have access to the friendliest person in any environment, untie one of your shoes and walk around. Eventually somebody's going to say, hey, your shoe's untied. So that is a good person. And now you have access to somebody that's accessible there. You can talk to them. Other than that, I usually carry around bartering and or payment objects, cutting implement or device in the form of a ceramic razor blade and or that diamond wire stuff that I was talking about. Anything that is hard to improvise on the fly is usually what I carry. So cutting implement, cordage, a knife, cutting implement of some kind, cordage, and if there's a very unique type of locking mechanism or handcuff in the area, I'll try and have a key to circumvent everything and just go for a key access to that. So that's what I usually carry with me, depending on where I am. And it changes, obviously, depending on where I go. This should lead you to some bullshit detection when you see people training for this type of stuff. If they're not changing up what they carry, depending on where they're going, they're probably not really preparing for anything. And you see this at high levels. I've seen some Navy SEALs take some plastic handcuff keys to Northern Africa. You know, so hasta las mejores familias, you know, even in the best families, there's some stupidity there, you know. So prepare for the possible. And if the improbable happens, you're already halfway to a solution.
Regarding the effects of the drug war, how can the average person with limited resources help or make a difference?
Education. Education, following the news. Well, actually knowing what's going on, what's happening in your communities, realizing that this drug war, as it's called, has interests that are higher and bigger than just these cartels that are operating in Mexico. There's international interest behind them. You know, fentanyl comes from somewhere. You know, the people that show people how to make it come from a certain place. Cartels have been utilizing Chinese banking apps to move their money for years now. And once that goes into their Chinese banking industry, the U.S. can't see it. What does that have to do with you? Well, you know, a big segment of your politics in the U.S. right now is very pro-China. Is that good for you? I don't know. When I immigrated to the United States, I had a pretty cool group of people that supported me. And they were very political. And when they saw me and my experience, they say, are you here to escape or are you here to make things better? And I said, I'm here to make things better. Cool. So you probably need to turn on to politics or politics will turn on you, is what they said. I understand that, you know, there's an old man that gets lost in the White House right now, and there's another dude with orange skin that's the best competition, and all that is very confusing and disheartening for some of us. But politics doesn't just happen at that level, it also happens at a local level, you know. We vote with our wallets in a lot of ways. We can vote in the future with how we educate our children, how they learn things and how they're aware of what's going on. I think there's a disconnect with a lot of Americans with what they perceive in their backyards and what's actually happening internationally. Post 9/11, travel has been weird, and some people just don't travel as they used to, you know? If you're not a weirdo like Jeanette or me, you don't travel. You're afraid, I guess. People travel less internationally now. When I say travel less internationally, I'm not talking about traveling to Paris or going to Bali or going to like one of these tourist destinations. I mean, actually going somewhere where it's kind of shady or risky and you're learning about a culture and you're immersing yourself into it. One of the best gifts you can have is travel. And one of the best political educations you can have as far as foreign policy and just humanity is travel. So if I could recommend anything for anybody out there that's trying to get involved in the world, it's to travel, to talk to people from from the other side of the aisle, to engage with conversations with people around you that might not share your political views, but that share the basic needs that you do. You know, there's a very big effort right now in the U.S. to separate people. There's a very big divide. I'm not from the U.S., and I see a lot of things that are very reminiscent to Mexico right now, as far as how they're being put against each other and how the other side is always bad. But in the end, I am friends with everybody from every single political spectrum in the U.S. right now. I have friends from every single subgenre of humanity right now. I have friends with that say, "Hey, this is my pronoun," and I'll try. I'm new here. I don't know what the rules of the land are. I'll try. I think there's a bunch of things that are either a hell no or a hell yes for Americans, and we need to kind of shift back and to see what makes us similar. What unites us. And if you want to fight this drug war or whatever conflict is happening on the other side of the border, you have to realize that conflict isn't about cartels, isn't about drugs. It's an international effort being made to degrade the United States and to tire it down and to make it into the next Roman Empire and to make it fall. That's what I see anyways.
And I think just to add to that, as a Mexican and with friends and family living in Mexico, what people can do to support us is solidarity. I think understanding that we are going through a crisis, understanding that there are hundreds of thousands of disappeared people still in Mexico, that homicide rates are basically, the impunity rate on homicides is through the roof, is over 90%. We are going through something that in other countries would otherwise be considered an active conflict zone. And I think what our neighbors across the border can support us in is understanding that we are going through a crisis, and sharing information. The reporting that we're often doing in Mexico rarely gets noticed abroad. And, I think, as Ed pointed, the awareness and education surrounding that, I think, could be a very effective support tool to just bridging solidarity and helping to supporting other people and understanding.
Yeah. Mexico and the United States are linked in a lot of ways. I know in the past politics have said, Mexico, corrupt, and they need to fix their own problems and all these things. That is in the past. We feed a lot of fentanyl to a very hungry American drug market. Foreign policy in the past has fed weapons and ammunition to cartels in Mexico openly, from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. That happened. And nobody talks about the victims on this side. I raised about $6,000 for the Ryan Terry Foundation through charity. I did it to make a point. Like, hey, this Mexican that was actually shot at by some of those Fast and Furious guns is making money for a charity for a Border Patrol agent on the U.S. side. Why did he do that? Well, there's a bunch of victims out here that nobody supports, so I'm trying to bring awareness to that. We're linked. You can close the border down tomorrow and put the military on that border, and all you're going to do is hasten your economic downfall as a country, because Mexico is your second largest consumer of products. Mexico's peso is stable as hell. It's attracting a lot of foreign investment, and it's not because of the federal government in Mexico. It's because China is tanking, and they're looking for other places to manufacture the things. That's why Mexico is going through an economic boom of a sort. But again, the next China is Mexico. Labor, youth, skills, we outperform China in every dimension. And if your plan as Americans is isolation and closing the border, you're just going to hasten your fall. So I think figuring out what unites us, figuring out what we have links and what we have together, and actually politicizing and actually knowing about some of these things, what's going on, and not depending on Fox News or CNN to deliver the information that every now and then Jeanette sends me something or I post something that I find online and everybody's like, why isn't this in the mainstream media? Realistically, it's because they don't care or they just don't want any of this out there. They want to keep the status quo, I guess. I don't know. But being informed, that's the best weapon you can have, and that's legit. If you want to be active, know, knowledge. That's it.
This person asks, aside from the one store in Mexico you can purchase a firearm from legally? And is anyone pushing for reasonable access to firearms for personal protection?
Yes. If you did a poll right now in Mexico and asked the people if they would be welcoming to the idea of legally being able to own and easily being able to procure and carry firearms, the majority of Mexicans are going to say, yes, that's what we want. But the one that are in charge of all that is the Mexican military and the government. And if you want to tell a good government from a bad government apart, usually the first thing that most bad governments do is disarm the population because you don't want them to turn on you. That's what we see in Mexico. It's been a culture of disarmament that's stemmed from the 60s. And that's interesting that it's from the 60s. It's recently been revealed that most of the presidents in Mexico from the 50s on forwards have been on the payroll of the CIA. So again, this whole aspect of this being a Mexico problem and that the Mexicans should fix their own thing. The U.S. foreign policy in Mexico has been active since at least the 50s, and a lot of the issues that we're facing now come directly from destabilization and horrible programs from the foreign policy that have affected us in such a way where we are where we are right now. It's not all the blame, but there is some blame there.
This person asks, I've done some deep research that seems to indicate that the U.S. is a hot money capital of the world, and that there's deliberately no deep investigation of the U.S. banks or bankers that launder cartel money. Do you have any insight on how, and any hope that America can be a better neighbor?
So yeah, shady stuff is being done by the government on both sides. Things are being covered up. Things are embarrassing. There's probably the whole aspect of, hey, we have to tighten security up so the cartels don't come here. The cartels have been active in the United States for years. The Sinaloa cartel was born in LA. The Sinaloa cartel should be called the LA cartel, but that's just not the case because perception and whatever. These cartels have been operating in the United States for decades. And if anybody doubts any of this, look at some of the drops in gang violence during the early parts of the 2000s and the late 90s, directly in correlation or in tandem with the expansion of power and the control of the Sinaloa cartel in local drug markets in the U.S. They basically went over there and said, hey, keep quiet, cut out competition, now everything's quiet. So gang violence as a whole in the United States, believe it or not, was lowered by the Sinaloa cartel influence in the country. It's because it's a single controlling force. Now there are Chinese gangs, there's weird other types of gangs out there doing their thing as well in places like LA and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of other people coming in. And that's going to lead to some violence probably, but what's going to happen when the new generation cartel that we just talked about in there, as far as we just talked about them improvising mines and IEDs and them recruiting people and torturing people and making other people, what happens when that ultra-violent militarized cartel that has clear signs of being supported by the Chinese state in a lot of ways, what happens when they finally cross the border or when they finally gain control of a large segment of the border and they start setting off operations in the United States, which is they've already been found trying to figure that out, but not in a large way as it is here in Mexico. But what happens when you start seeing these armed incursions on each other's territories in the United States? And if people doubt any of this, go to Arizona. Arizona is the abduction capital of the United States, and there's a lot of things happening there. A lot of corruption on the law enforcement side and the political side there as well. People want to look into that for themselves. Very reminiscent of stuff that we see in places like Jalisco.
This person asks, I've heard reports of the Mexican military, I believe the army, fighting alongside Carteles Unidos to quell Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación incursion into states like Michoacán and Guerrero. Is this accurate? And if so, is something that the Mexican government at its highest levels has or will ever publicly acknowledge?
I don't know. I'll speak to this and you can speak to this as well. I think the Mexican government at its highest level is the Mexican military. That's the highest level of the Mexican government. That's what we've seen historically. There's no way you can get into power in Mexico without having the military backing you, in a way. It's always been the case. It's the hand that rocks the cradle. It's, that the military is that. The Guacamaya leaks that happened recently has showcased a Mexican army that is fragmented, that has a lot of internal politics of its own, that supports one cartel on one region and one cartel in the other. I've seen videos and heard reports and heard stories of the Carteles Unidos basically reinforced by federal agents and federal forces, basically trying to repel new generation cartel incursions into places like Michoacan, where there's trench warfare going on and drones are being utilized. It's like a mini Ukraine, is what it's basically. If you want a description of it, it's like a mini Ukraine conflict in that area. Yes, there is definitely a relationship between federal forces and certain cartel elements. This is just irrefutable, and there's no way of them saying that doesn't happen. What you see, I think, on my end, what I see is basically a federal government that is defeated in the notion or concept of trying to do things the ways they did it in the past, like Calderon. Basically, let's do this force and let's try and kick all these guys out. So now they're realizing that they're outmatched and or outmanned, so they're looking for allyships with local groups. And again, this is very reminiscent of a conflict, of a war, where a conventional army will will make allyships with warlords, and this is Afghanistan. This is Iraq again. This is one of these things. But again, for some reason, when you look at the global conflicts that are going on across the globe, think about Ukraine, which Mexico outperformed as far as deaths for a bit, But we never think about Mexico as a war zone, not specifically as a war zone, and I think there's a reason that is. I don't know why, but there's definitely a relationship between politics, cartels, and at the very top of everything, or englobing everything, the Mexican army. The Mexican army is definitely not. It doesn't have a single cohesive plan for all of Mexico, and you can tell that each of the elements of leadership in the army and the regions that they operate in and that they patrol, all of them have their own agreements with the local cartels, and it's a free-for-all. That's what I see. What do you see in it?
Yeah, I think when it comes to Michoacan, understanding that the security apparatus basically in Mexico operates on different branches. So we have the Policía Municipal, the municipal police, you have the prosecutors police, you have the military, you have the Guardia Nacional, you have different branches that sometimes don't operate conjointly, don't operate in one tandem. So when we look at places like Michoacan, we do see, at least from the people that I do speak to, they do genuinely believe that the Guardia Nacional is collaborating with the Carteles Unidos, that they're doing a concerted effort basically to push back the incursion of the Jalisco cartel. We see similar things happening in Guanajuato, in Guerrero as well, in Zacatecas. So when it comes to what the locals believe, absolutely. They do believe that there are concerted efforts by the federal governments to basically collude with, or support criminal organizations. It's also, when we look at the history of these criminal organizations, they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They have deep-seated relationships to either existing powerful organizations that have either collapsed, splintered, disintegrated, or reshaped into new ones. So, we still have those historical ties to one another. And with the Carteles Unidos in Michoacan, they have, they have ties to basically the inception of El Milenio. El Milenio cartel is where El Abuelo Farias came from. He's the leader of the Carteles Unidos, and he worked in tandem with El Mencho, the leader of Jalisco cartel. So, we're also talking about these deep-seated historical rivalries that have persisted for decades. And now we just basically throw in another catalyst to the fire, which is support from federal governments. It does sound a little bit conspiratorial. I can agree with that, but in the research and in the talking to locals, they do genuinely believe that.
Yeah. And the Guacamaya leaks that the Sedena, that the military themselves have wrote, you can see elements of like, hey, in this region of the military supports these people over here. This region of the military support, so they know about this. And when, right now the rhetoric in the United States is, are cartels a terrorist organization or not? That's the rhetoric. And I've actually spoken to Congress about some of these things. What happens when they do get declared a terrorist organization? Well, in the past, if history teaches us anything, how the U.S. used that designation to basically make enemies of a lot of places that it wanted to invade. What happened in Iraq when they did that declaration there is basically they turned the whole Iraqi army into a terrorist organization, suppliers and/or aides. I think something similar might happen in Mexico if this happens. This is a, guesstimation. How can you make the case that the army in Mexico is completely unattached from cartels and use them to fight cartels if you're a foreign entity trying to stabilize this region without, taking into account that they work together, for me, it's disheartening. I know that a lot of people in Mexico still to this day, and if you want to see the level of propaganda being put out by the Mexican military on TikTok, for example, I know for a fact that the Mexican military has made a concerted effort to put out loads of propaganda, pro-military propaganda, pro-recruitment propaganda for the Army, for the Navy, for the military branches in Mexico, for the Guardia Nacional in Mexico through TikTok, making it, come join us. This is the way. We're the baddest motherfuckers. Look, we're shooting at the cartels from the air. Join us. And then you see videos of some of these guys that get recruited, and they get stored in a storage place with a bunch of mattresses filled with lice somewhere, and those are the Guardia Nacional dormitories. And a lot of the money that's going to them is actually ending up in the pockets of leadership. And I know this because I've trained them, and I know some of them that work there, and they tell me. All that shit we saw online on TikTok, yeah, none of that shit is happening. All these highly equipped soldiers that we see on some of these videos, yeah, those guys were basically staged for that. Propaganda happens on the government side as well. It's not just cartels putting out torture videos. So it's a complex situation in Mexico right now. I truly think and believe that whatever solution there is in the future does not involve in any way, shape, or form the Mexican military. I think it's part of the problem. It's become part of the problem now.
Yeah, and we just talked about, the Ayotzinapa case where text messages basically revealed that the military knew that these students were being kidnapped, possibly tortured, and eventually killed. So there is proven confirmation that the military has engaged in some form of terrorism against their own people as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of the beast in Mexico. As far as solutions go, like people ask me for solutions, like first off, I'm a kid from Tijuana. I used to skateboard. I don't know a lot about politics. I just have my experiences. But whatever solution there is, I don't think the Mexican army is going to be involved in any way, shape, or form. I don't know what's coming. I see a bipartisan effort in the U.S. to try and figure out a justification for intervention. Is it in the future? I don't know. It seems that way. 3 years ago, I said in 5 years, and we're at 3 years. So it seems like it's coming. I don't know. Hopefully I'm wrong about it. But whatever this war that's coming is going to be, like I feel like we're in for an American continent conflict of a sort. It's probably going to come from Mexico. And if it does, it's going to be a war that you're going to feel in your backyard, because this isn't a foreign war anymore. It's going to be a regional war. And as Americans, I think you should be prepared. You're going to feel this in your backyard. You're going to feel this in your hospitals. You're going to feel the fentanyl supply being cut off by conflict and the border being militarized and closed. And you're going to experience a health crisis that's going to dwarf whatever the COVID epidemic was, with all these people going into withdrawals. that's an aspect that I don't see anybody talk about, but that's coming if it does produce itself. It's scary. Again, I think whatever solutions are coming or whatever's coming, it's going to be something explosive. We're in for a fight of some sort.
That concludes it.
Cool. Thank you for helping me out with that, Jeanette. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for checking in on us. You travel a lot and you're involved in a lot of things, and I know you've been kind of absent online for a bit, and some people worry. I keep tabs on her. She's fine. But we are still keeping an eye on things down here, and we're still reporting on some of these things and trying to keep you informed on them. For her and for me, it's a project that is related to, we have an investment in this country, through blood and family. And we also have an investment in the U.S. So we're in-betweeners. We're opposite sides of an in-between here. We're trying to figure out how to make things better and how to put the information out. And we're aware that some of these things don't get reported on openly or obviously on some of the major networks and even on some of the alternative networks. There's a lot of cartel reporting going out there, which is basically regurgitating, conventional stuff that they see out there. This takes a lot of guts to do. And to report on and to kind of work on, and also the amount of information and videos that both of us get to see sometimes really takes a lot from you. So thank you guys for supporting our efforts, and thank you guys for supporting Jeanette's efforts here on the Patreon and out there on Instagram and some of these updates that we're going to be showcasing as far as what's going on in Mexico and giving some commentary as far as what's going on. It's all because of you. You guys are supporting us, and we're here because of you. So thank you.
And I also want to extend my thank yous to everyone, and also a deep felt apology to everyone for being absent.
And concern. It's not concern.
It is, as you said, it is very difficult sometimes to hear about these stories and to talk to mothers and to talk to family members of some of our affected people. And as much as we want to bring those stories to you, we're going to try, and we're going to keep doing it. And but I do apologize for that absence. It won't happen again.
We'll figure it out.
It might, but
again, thank you guys for the support. We can't do this without you guys. We are hopeful that we can keep doing this, and it's up to you guys. So thank you.
thank you.